Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I am absolutely delighted and very humbled to have a very special guest with us today, Rabbi Pinchas Allouche. Rabbi Allouche is the spiritual leader of Congregation Beth Tefillah in Scottsdale, Arizona. He is a highly respected rabbinic figure, a sought-after and I believe highly gifted lecturer. He is a blogger for large online publications such as the Huffington Post, as well as writing his own blog, which is excellent. And he is the author of many essays on the Jewish faith, mysticism, and social criticism. His wise, profound, and sensitive perspective on the world and its people, on life and living, is highly regarded and sought after by communities and individuals of all backgrounds. He received his rabbinic ordination in Milan, Italy in 1999. And since then, he has been listed as one of America's most inspiring rabbis. On a personal note, I consider Rabbi Allouche to be one of my spiritual mentors, and he is truly one of the wisest people that I know. Welcome, Rabbi Allouche. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Vera. Thank you for these humbling words. I wish my mother listens to this podcast. She'll believe you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well earned. And would you be willing to share with us, Rabbi, a little bit about how you got to doing and inspiring in the way that you do?
Sure. So I'll take you very quickly through my life journey up until this point. So I was born in France, in the south of France, in a city called Toulouse. I grew up there until the age of 8, and my family decided to move to South Africa, mainly because of my father's work. He's an aeronautical engineer, and he had a very lucrative job offer in Johannesburg, South Africa. So we moved to South Africa. We lived there for 6 years. And then we moved once again to a different country, different culture, and that was to Israel. My parents are passionate Zionists, and they always had a lifelong dream to move to Israel. So eventually they made it happen when I was 13. So from the age of 13, I grew up in Israel. And what is interesting is that, as you may know, teenagers begin to envision how their lives will evolve. And I too had a very specific vision. I was on a trajectory, like my friends, to go to the Israeli army. Then I said to myself at the age of 15, more or less, that I think I want to be an attorney, maybe a criminal attorney. And everything was going very well. I was training for the army too. I was doing well. And then at the age of 18, everything changed. Why? Because I have this genetic disease, which thank God is not a serious one. It's called familial Mediterranean fever. And when I started undergoing specific tests for the IDF, for the Israeli army, they immediately told me, no, 1 second, you have this genetic disease. You need to see a specific committee of doctors to decide whether you can even enlist in the army altogether. So I saw 3 of them, 3 committees, and the 3rd committee said to me, sorry, you can't go to the army. You have this genetic disease, FMF. We don't want you to fall into captivity and not have your medicine with you. So go find yourself something else to do. And it was almost an existential crisis for me because, I had everything planned, and all of a sudden things turned completely differently. So I consulted with my beloved mentor, Rabbi Dean Steinsaltz, who really was one of the great world scholars of our generation. And he said to me, look, out of the blue, there's a post in Geneva, a year is opening up. You can be a youth director there for the Jewish community, and I suggest that you look into it. So I went and I looked into it. I spoke the language, French. I interviewed for it, and they took me for the job as the youth director of the Jewish community. And as I was working with this Geneva community, a lovely, small, but very lovely and vibrant community, something resonated very profoundly. And I said to myself, oh, maybe all of this did happen for a reason. Maybe this was to uncover my deeper self. My deeper self resonates deeply with community work. So maybe I shouldn't necessarily become an attorney. Maybe I should look more into a community type of job. And I started thinking of all sorts of ideas. And then the career, if we may call it as such, of a rabbi really spoke to me the most. And that's when I decided to study rabbinics. I eventually, as you mentioned, I received my rabbinic degree in Milan, Italy, and then moved back to Israel, got married in Israel, and then worked there in different schools, moved to Atlanta with my beloved wife and one child then. And we lived in Atlanta for 4 years while I was an assistant rabbi and again, a youth director also in a very large congregation. And then eventually moved to Phoenix, where I was hired as a rabbi of a small congregation. Here in Phoenix, by the way, we also had a little crisis because that congregation that hired me eventually collapsed for all sorts of reasons, also because of the real estate crash of 2008. And then again, we find ourselves hanging in the air. But a few families came together and said, well, there's a void here in Scottsdale, Arizona. We need a community that faces outwards, that welcomes everyone for who they are and helps them grow where they are. So we founded Congregation Bet Tefillah some 11 years ago. And thank God it's been thriving ever since. And we feel that our purpose is indeed being fulfilled.
Thank you for sharing that. It's, I imagine, very familiar to some of the people listening that you set an intention and for whatever reason, that intention was not meant to be. There was a crisis, if you will, where you began to ask yourself some questions. You opened yourself to some opportunities that showed up. Took some risks, in doing that, and eventually uncovered some of those hidden parts of yourself and what was your higher calling. So how can people do that for themselves? I know that's a really big question, but a lot of people, even people that are very successful, not in what we would consider a crisis mode or unfulfilled even in their jobs or work, but people that are still wondering, like, what is really out there for me? What am I here for? How can they start on that path to discovering that?
Right. Well, that's a great question. And I think it's maybe the ultimate question of life. How can I find my purpose? How, in the midst of a chaos, can I find some clarity and focus on the reason for which I was sent down to this world? I have what's called a POP theory, and I'll share it with you very briefly. But POP is spelled P-O-P-P, and that really stands for 4 separate words. The first letter P stands for personality, O stands for opportunities, the next letter P stands for places, and the final letter stands for people. And I think that if we can become in tune with those 4 words and what they represent, which we'll discuss in just a moment, then we'll be able more or less to find our purpose each and every day of our lives. The first P, personality, is that the first question we have to ask ourselves is, what is that personality that we have? Do I have any talents and skills that I am not actualizing? And if so, then maybe I should begin actualizing them, because if God gave them to me, then he wants me to use them. So if I'm an artist and I'm not being an artist, I'm not actualizing that side of me, then I'm doing a disservice to myself and maybe even to the world around me. And if I'm an athlete and I'm not being athletic, same. And if I'm a scholar and I'm not being scholarly, then again, the same. So we have to find out exactly who we are first and foremost. That's personality, and actualize again every aspect of ourselves. The next word is opportunity, which really is being open to the world. One of my favorite authors, Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, writes in his book that the goal of life, and maybe I'm not quoting verbatim, but this was the big idea. The goal of life is not to ask what you want from life, but it is to ask what life wants from you. And that's what I mean by opportunities. Very often, yes, we have our schedule, our plan. We know exactly that at 10 a.m. I'll have this meeting, and at 12 o'clock I'll have this lunch meeting, and so on and so forth. But sometimes there are opportunities that are thrown our way that we're not expecting. And part of life, maybe the main part of life, is to ask what life wants from me. What is it that I have to open myself up to? Are there opportunities that may not have fit in my schedule of today, but that I must seize because God is sending them my way because he believes in me and me only. Otherwise, he would send them to someone else. He believes in me and in my capability to achieve those opportunities. Now, it could be small opportunities, like maybe just being stuck in traffic. And as I'm stuck in traffic, it's my opportunity to turn to the person right next to me who's also stuck in traffic and wave and say hello and cheer them up. Or it could be a big opportunity, whether it's a job opportunity that comes my way and that resonates deeply. Or it could be also just a general opportunity of helping someone in need that just came storming into my life. So that's number two. Number three, I think the places that we go to are also there for us to best actualize our purpose. Sometimes we think that we're going on vacation to the Caribbean islands or to Hawaii or to the Bahamas or wherever it may be. But really, we are going there not just to go on vacation, but maybe we'll meet someone there that will change our lives. Maybe we'll have an opportunity again to achieve something there that we could have never planned. So we have to be, again, open to the places that we go to. Now, it could be big places. It could be also the local place of the supermarket that I'm going to. And the last and final part of this map is map of purpose, right? Is people. Last piece, people. The people that we meet, I also believe are part of our purpose. They are there in our social circle or in our family circles for us to learn from them or from them to learn from us, and for us to enrich ourselves with the bond that we are creating with them. Now, some people come and go. Some people come and stay. And there are all sorts of people also. But every single individual that is there in my circle right now is there to enhance my purpose in life and to actualize it in the best of ways. I'll just share with you a quick story, but you know the supermarket, it's called Fry's here on Shea and Tatum in Scottsdale. And I was there with a big shopping list one day because my wife needed me to go shopping for her. We were preparing for our Friday night, Shabbat dinner, the dinner of the Sabbath. And I'm there in the kosher section looking for chicken. And I'm saying to myself, gosh, I'm wasting all this time. It happens sometimes. And I should have just sent someone else, or I should have done this some other time. And all of a sudden, someone comes to me and says to me out of nowhere, says to me, "Excuse me, are you a rabbi?" I said to him, "What makes you think I'm a rabbi? What are you talking about?" So we had a nice laugh. And he says to me, no, the only reason I'm asking you this question is because I just lost my dad. And I need to come and say Kaddish, which is the prayer of the mourners, according to Judaism, at a congregation. Do you, by any chance, have a congregation? Do you have a service where I can come and say this prayer? And I said to him, of course, yes, please come tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Every day we have morning services. And then it occurred to me, okay, I came here thinking that I was going to buy chicken, which was certainly part of my purpose. But there was a deeper reason that I had to open myself up to. And that is that this man needed help. He had just lost his dad. And here God sent me to this place and had me encounter with this specific person in order to fulfill my purpose in life. And we have instances like that, I would say, each and every day, tens of them, if not hundreds of them sometimes. And all we need to do is really open ourselves up to them so that we can actualize the purpose for which we were created.
Wow, that's a brilliant story to illustrate the point. And, what's interesting is these days, a lot of people are walking around with a lot of stress and, that list to go buy the chicken and go do the thing, whatever the thing is, can be so overwhelming that we kind of put our head down, and it's hard to even see these opportunities. We might not even get the eye contact with this individual, or so what do you recommend for people that, want to kind of follow your words, to be open to the possibilities, the opportunities, the people, the places, to find the meaning, the nugget, the learning there? But it's just, life is just taken such a toll on them, and they are so busy. They honestly don't even have time to explore.
Right. Good question. So look, I would say two things, just two things come to mind, and maybe we can develop these ideas. But one is one of my favorite quotes that says that there are two types of people that fail: those that don't have a plan and those who are obsessed with their plans. Mm. So people who don't have a plan, obviously, you need a plan. If you want to go to medical school, you need a plan. If you want to have a fruitful week, you need a plan. But if you're obsessed with your plan, when your plan doesn't go according to the plan, according to its way, then you'll become very aggravated and frustrated. So don't be too obsessed with your plan. Open yourself up to that which God has in store for you too, that which life has in store for you too. And that is something to keep in mind. That's an approach to truly adopt in order to indeed fulfill our purpose. Because as mentioned, it's not just about what we want from life, it's about what life wants from us. And for that, we can't be obsessed with our plans. We have to be open to the plan that is out there for us. That's number one. That's a question of an approach. But practically speaking, let's be as pragmatic as possible. I would say that, and I do this with myself, and that's why I'm offering this, but I would say that every person should have a point every single day to make time for that which was not part of his or her plan. So in other words, I will go out of my way each and every day to reach out to someone else that was not part of my meetings today, that was not part of my plan, or is not even part of what I think I need to do in order to, check boxes and make feel satisfied with my day. It's going beyond the letter of the law. Let me think of something that may not be a part of my plan, may not be a part of my success story for today, but still I'm doing it just because I need to come out of my own cocoon and bubble and really reach out to that which is out there for me and I may not have been aware of. So I think that practically speaking, if we each dedicate 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day to that which we don't see fit, to that which we don't think necessarily fits in our plan, but we do it just to come out of our bubble and be selfless, then I think it will help us also open ourselves up, open our eyes up, and open our hearts up.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that last bit about opening our hearts up, it seems to be somewhat of a theme today that I'm picking up around service, around contribution. So yes, having some idea of a plan as it relates to our strengths, our capabilities, our talents, things that we're interested in doing, but to not, as you said, over obsess over that, to kind of hold it lightly and be open to those opportunities, people, places that might bring things that we didn't expect, and to be of service. And one of the things that's coming up is this concept of trust, or kind of a surrender, because for me to not obsess over a plan, something that I deem is relevant and important to me, something that I want, requires some level of a trust in something, call it the universe, call it God, spirit, whatever that is, that there's something out there that is bigger for me, that is going to show itself to me in some way. And some people have had such an experience in this life where it's really hard to trust because they've suffered. So how can they access that? Right.
It's a great question, especially those who suffered and especially those who've undergone trauma. It's very, very hard to trust. But I will say that it begins with the choice that we make, a choice of looking at life, not just in a positive way, but in a way that we develop a belief that what I have right now in front of me is really a part of my purpose. It's really the reason for which I was created. I just want to share a quick story maybe to make this point, but it's a famous story about a lovely couple by the name of Grace and Walter Lance. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. Grace and Walter Lance got married in 1940, and shortly thereafter they went on their honeymoon and they decided to be adventurous. So they hired a wooden cabin and they wanted to spend 3 days in a forest there. And on the first night, they realized that they had made a big mistake. Why? Because they couldn't fall asleep. There was a woodpecker pecking on their roof non-stop, and they just couldn't fall asleep. Later on during the night, things got even worse because it started to rain. And they also realized that the woodpecker pecking these holes also created the huge holes in the roof, so that all the rain drenched the blankets and drenched the entire cabin. And at one point, Walter told his wife, Grace, you know what, I'm going to shoot this woodpecker. We're not going to have this a second night and a third night. Grace stopped him from doing so. The second night, It rained again, and again they were soaked, and again they had this nightmare. And the third night, they turned and they realized that the entire honeymoon turned into one big, nightmare. But they made the choice, and the very conscious choice, to look at their experience not as a sour one, not as a bitter one, but as a good one, as a happy one. They said to themselves, okay, we have a happy experience. Now we just have to figure out why it was happy. And they decided to make a cartoon out of their own experience. This cartoon began to disseminate itself very, very quickly. And today we know it as Woody Woodpecker. And Grace and Walter Lantz transformed their experience into an experience of happiness, an experience that spread happiness to the rest of the world. Many, many years later, when you would ask Grace and Walter Lantz, what was the best experience of your life? They would say being in a honeymoon drenched because of some stupid woodpecker. But yeah, they had made the choice to transform what could have been a very bitter experience to a happy one. They just have to find out why exactly it is happy. And they turned it into really a gold mine on so many levels. But I think that this story illustrates the approach that we ought to have. We really have the choice. When I experience a bitter relationship, when I experience a bitter challenge, when I experience any type of difficulty in life, am I going to see this as a challenge, see this as a difficulty, see this in a bitter way? Or am I going to say, no, in my mind, it's a happy experience. Now, let me just find out why. Let me go to the same reasoning that Walter and Grace Lantz really exercised. And in a way, I think that could really transform the way we look at life altogether.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I sense it takes some level of courage when you don't quite yet know what the learning or the gift is, right? You're still kind of in the river of mud, or, in the rain, so to speak.
Right.
And, it takes courage to believe in something that you're not yet holding in your hand, seeing with your eyes, hearing with your ears. And when we do that, then it opens us to the possibility of seeing or hearing or experiencing something even greater. I agree with you that it is a choice.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a choice. And I think that the other side of it is that it's a choice that must lead to action. So Woody Woodpecker was a cartoon that was created by them, right? They decided, well, let's transform this experience into a happy experience by launching ourselves into action, into a deed that really transformed the world, creating again this Woody Woodpecker cartoon. This I think when we face our own challenges too, we have to say to ourselves, okay, I have this approach. I know this is a happy experience. Let me find out why. And then this step number 2 would be, well, then let me create an action that is consistent with the happiness that I can create from this experience.
And one of the things that I did in my career is I worked as an executive coach in outplacement. So people who were laid off of their jobs. And I remember at the beginning, a lot of them were very distraught because they lost their identity. They lost so much. It was a grief in every sense of the word. And once they were able to kind of regulate their system and ask themselves some of those higher questions, they did in fact realize what is most important to them, what their true values were, and they realized that they weren't quite fulfilling on those things. Mm-hmm. And they recognized the gift in the pause and the opportunity to recreate something that's even more aligned. Right. And they have, many of them started companies or got into roles that were an even better fit. But if you had asked them in the moment of the crisis, it was a very dark, lonely, shameful place to be.
Right. It's true. And I see that also quite often as a rabbi, that I would say what you just said maybe points to the biggest challenge people have that stops them from having this positive approach. And that is that they start thinking less of themselves instead of seeing themselves as infinite potentials, as I would call it, or as Judaism calls it, as divine souls. we see ourselves as failures, or worse, we see ourselves as, they call it, that's the expression out there, good for nothings. You know, when I came to America, that was one of these expressions that shocked me the most. What does that even mean, good for nothing? I don't know until this day, but it certainly points to someone who's miserable because he lost any type of faith towards himself. And sometimes, like you were saying before, it's not our fault. Sometimes it's because that's what we were fed as children from abusive parents or from abusive teachers. You know, one of the great educators of and addict experts of our generation was Dr. Rabbi Abraham J. Twersky. And he would famously say that when his parents would raise him and he would misbehave, they would never tell him, you're such a bad boy, or you're a silly boy. They would never box him into an adjective. Rather, they would tell him in Yiddish, es passt nicht, it's unbecoming of you. And that made all the difference in his education. Why? Because when you say to a boy or to a girl, you're a bad boy, bad girl, you frame them into bad. And then obviously they'll think less of themselves. But when you say to a boy or to a girl, you know what, it's unbecoming of you because you are here, all the way up here. And what you did right now is all the way down there. Then they feel like, oh, they were empowered to really be their best selves. And they just slipped. They failed a little bit. But the parents are still seeing them up here. And in a way, I think that's one of the great lessons in education, not just towards the children, but towards ourselves. When we fail, we shouldn't say to ourselves, bad boy, bad girl, or good for nothings. Well, we should say to ourselves, that was unbecoming of me. But it doesn't mean that I've lost faith in the real me. My real me still remains intact. And my real me still remains an infinite potential, a divine soul. Now, let me just align my life with my real me.
Brilliant. You know, I often say to clients that are kind of harsh with themselves when they first come around certain behaviors, like maladaptive behaviors, maybe shouting at their spouse or overeating or over drinking or whatever that kind of numbing mechanism is, that they are not their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
A person is not his or her behavior,
Right.
right? Typically, the behavior is a result, as you said, of their upbringing, of decisions they made a long time ago about who they are, what's possible for them. Am I bad? Am I unworthy? Am I not good enough? Whatever that might be. And the behaviors are just basically an expression, a mirror image of those beliefs about themselves. But those beliefs are not who they are. Their true self, with a capital S, is
Right.
that higher being, as you said, that source of love, and that has a higher purpose in this life. And so, how can people, if we were to kind of go back to was it POPP? Is that what it was?
That's right.
I think the first one you said was personality. Let's start with there for a moment. What if someone says, Rabbi, I would love to get to know who I am. I've been kind of trying to figure that out for 20, 30, 40, 50, 70 years. But I don't even know where to start. How do I realize that?
Right. So that's you're asking a very good question. So it starts with what we were just saying. First of all, recognizing that you do have infinite potential, recognizing that what you may be thinking of yourself is really much less of who you truly are. By the way, and I'm going to get to your question, but if you can help me, I wish there could be some type of linguistic revolution in the English language and in the way we speak. Because when we speak of I am, there, in my humble opinion, there is a very strong injustice that we are doing towards ourselves and towards people in society. And what I'm referring to is that it's quite fascinating to me that when we have a physical disease, we say, I have. So for example, I have a cold, I have COVID, I have whatever. But when we speak of a mental disease, what do we say? We say, I am. I am schizophrenic. I am bipolar. I am hyperactive. Why? In my eyes, that's just wrong. Why are we saying I have for physical disease, and for mental diseases, I am, as if they define us? They should not define us. we should say, I have schizophrenia, I have bipolarism, but not I am, because that's not who we truly are. Who we truly are, as mentioned again, is that infinite soul that really believe that there's, Jews really believe that there's a part of God in us. And if God is infinite, that means we're also infinite. So it starts with that acknowledgement, with that meditation, and with that recognition that we are much more than our physical or mental diseases. And we are much more, by the way, than our work, than our jobs. Unfortunately, today, you ask someone, who are you? You know what they do? They'll take out their business card and they'd say, that's who I am. I'm a doctor, I'm an accountant, I'm a lawyer. That's not who you are, that's what you do. Who you are is also so much more than that. It's recognizing again that you have infinite potential. So that's number one, that recognition that we are much more than what we have, or much more than what, whatever disease or whatever job may define us. That's number one. Number two, I would encourage people to try out as many things, hobbies that they can. Some people won't discover that they're artists until they start painting. Some people won't discover that they are musicians until they start playing the piano or the violin or whatever it may be. So you have to try it out, and then something will resonate. And number three, I would say that the other way to find out exactly who you are, or the personality, the first P, is to ask your mentors, ask people that really know you, not just rely on yourself. I say that about myself. I don't think that without my mentor in life, Dean Steinsaltz, that I mentioned before, I wouldn't be close to where I am today, because sometimes he saw in me much more than I saw in myself. So you have to ask your mentors too. People really care about you.
Thank you. And I think just on that last point, we also get to give that to other people. Just like we ask for it, we receive it, and to be open to it and not defensive to it, to be curious about what we get as feedback, but also to give that sense of belief in others, especially the younger ones who don't quite yet have allowed themselves access to this greater potential for themselves. Or so us, seeing them as something bigger, right? Cheering them on rather than seeing them as where they are.
Right.
I think that's one of the biggest gifts that we can give to people, the
Right.
gift of belief and expectation, as those parents did, in the example, right? It's, yes, there is this behavior. This is where you are now in, where you live and what you do, but that's not who you are.
Right.
You are infinite potential, and and to support people and accessing what that is for them. And I think, to your point around, the I am kind of embodiment, I think that's such an important point. And I'm on that mission right there with you, because I think, we ultimately get to choose who we want to be. It's a declaration, right? Let's say I am creative. And when we begin to really tune into that and repeat that to ourselves, even though it might be, let's say if somebody doesn't believe that they're creative and they wish to be, maybe that feels a little foreign to the body at first. But when they repeat that with love and curiosity enough times, the brain begins to be open to that and look for opportunities to notice moments in life where we have been creative, for example, or opportunities where we could step into more creativity or learning or growth. And ultimately, those opportunities, the people, the places will come our way with more ease because we haven't resisted it. Right. So I think it really is deciding who do we want to be,
right,
and allowing that to be our focus, to dictate our actions. Because I agree with you, it's action, action, action. And sometimes we need to revisit that. Sometimes we try something and it doesn't land, it doesn't resonate, right? Our intuition says, not quite it, right? To pivot and try something different, to not see it as a failure, but rather as another stepping stone. Because when we know what doesn't fit or what we don't want, we're that much closer to what we do want.
That's a very, very well said. Very well said. That's right. Yes. Maybe it's just God's way, or the universe's way, however you want to call it, to really direct us in that which fits us, that which is aligned to our deeper self. Sometimes you need, it's like Thomas Edison. I think he tried thousands light bulbs before that ultimate light bulb shone. So sometimes, it's one after the other, one failure after the other, that eventually leads you to that light bulb that shines. It's almost like Winston Churchill put it, that he said the definition of success is going from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. Now, how can you keep the enthusiasm going? That's because you believe, like you just said, that you're one step closer to that ultimate path of yours that is truly aligned with your infinite self. But for that, you need to be involved in action. And I think the more the action, the better it is. The more we devote ourselves to even things that we may think are impossible, the more chances we have to really find that ultimate pathway of ours. There's a great book out there, and you'll excuse me, I don't have it in front of me, but I forgot the exact title. I know the subtitle. That's what counts. It was written by two teenagers, Christian teenagers, and they speak about their religion in the book, but that's not the point of the book. The subtitle is A Teenager's Rebellion Against Low Expectations. And they speak about how really it is quite a shame that we demand less of this younger generation while they want more. They want to achieve more. When we demand less, then they become less. When we demand more, they become more. And they become, therefore, more aligned with their infinite potential, which is more. And just speaking of, linguistic phrase or revolution, I want to make a suggestion here. And I don't know the exact answer to this, but it's interesting to note, right? There are phrases that were engraved in the consciousness of America and of other cultures too. But of America particularly, there's a phrase by John F. Kennedy on January 22nd, 1961, during his inauguration, where he said to the people of America, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Now, I've thought about this, and I asked myself, why is it that this phrase indeed has been so engraved in the consciousness of our nation? I mean, it's not such a brilliant phrase. He's just asking people to do something for their country. Why? And I think that's because John F. Kennedy understood this, what we're speaking about, and he was speaking to the best in us. And when you speak to the best in people, they respond. Something clicks, and they become the best version of themselves. He asked people to roll up their sleeves and do something for America. And we ought to ask ourselves of the same thing. Don't just have big dreams, translate them into big actions. Some of them will fail, fine. But eventually something will click. But don't compromise the action, because by compromising the action, you'll be compromising a part of yourself too.
The word that popped up for me as you shared that, honestly, is the word love. Like when we step into action with that sense of love, that sense of giving, right, then I almost feel like there's like an accelerated path to realizing what's possible for us and what's most fulfilling for us. And we also know that to be true. When we radiate that love out of our heart, it sends certain frequency out into the field, and we tend to get back ideas that have that higher vibration, those impulses of thought, those intuition, like I should go to that place, I should go meet that person, I should take this opportunity, I should do that assessment or meet that coach or whatever it might be to get to know myself. That will lead us towards the purpose. And one of the things that kind of came up for me as you were sharing around the expectations, the book that you mentioned, I think that it is important to have higher expectations of others and, of course, of ourselves when it comes from a place of compassion and curiosity rather than judgment. I think where some people kind of stumble on expectation, this concept, is that when there's an expectation that comes with a perception of what we or others need to be, should be, could be, in the sense of like putting us in a box. And that can be very limiting because it's almost like it's a prescription. This is what you should do in your life.
Right.
And yet none of us know what anybody else, could be, what's possible for them, because we're kind of filtering from our own belief about what's possible for them. So it's about expectation, as you said, of the fact that there is something bigger there and possible for them, infinite possibilities, but just being very mindful of not judging or limiting ourselves or others.
Right. No, that's so true. So I'll share with you a quick story, but I remember going to Los Angeles and making a point to visit a restaurant called Milky Way, because back in the day, this was maybe 10 years ago, the mother of Steven Spielberg, the famous filmmaker, ran the restaurant. And she was there every day greeting her customers. I said to myself, I have to go meet this lovely woman. And I did, and walked into the restaurant, and she greeted us with a big smile. My wife was with me. And I decided to engage in a conversation with her. And I asked her a few questions. My first question was, so how do you make a Steven Spielberg? And her answer stayed with me. She said to me, oh, that's easy. You just have to let them be. And then she went on to say how she raised Steven Spielberg here in Scottsdale, Arizona. Eventually, they moved to Los Angeles. And Scottsdale, Arizona wasn't as developed as it was back then. But she would let Steven, her son, roam the desert with his tiny little camera and do what he does best, take pictures and so on. And that's what eventually made him become that Steven Spielberg that the world knows today. But sometimes, like you said, we as parents or even as individuals, we tend to box ourselves or our children, thinking that, oh, this is where you belong. But really, these boxes are often created because of trauma, because of insecurities, because of fear. And they certainly don't reflect the infinite potential that there is in us or in our children. And therefore, we have to let them be, let them run along with that infinite potential that is implanted in them. And sometimes they'll discover that there are great filmmakers in the deserts of Arizona. And sometimes they'll discover that there are great engineers in the labs of Silicon Valley. But let them be. And just as it is for our children, so it is with ourselves. Sometimes we really have to let ourselves be, let go, shed of any preconceived boxes that maybe others try to impose on us, and follow that which our gut tells us, follow that which our intuition tells us. And at the same time, of course, devote as much action and as much effort to that endeavor.
Thank you for that story. I loved it. And I think it's letting others be, whether it's our spouse, our child, excuse me, really letting people be and letting ourselves be.
Right.
Meaning that just allowing us to play and explore and tune in to what feels right and what doesn't feel right, and allow our emotions to kind of guide the actions, and really listen to that. Because I think when we don't let ourselves be, in the sense that we ourselves box ourselves in, right? I've done this thing, or I've gone to school for X number of years to do this thing, and that's what I need to do. And yet, if our heart isn't in it, if our soul isn't thriving, singing, dancing as we do that, that's really important information, and we must listen. And what I find in my work is that if we don't listen, it seems to get louder and louder and louder. And sometimes it manifests as crises, or sometimes as, God forbid, diseases in the body or whatnots. And it's really important to listen to that voice of our heart.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. So true. Now, sometimes we're deaf to it. Sometimes it's not that we're deaf to it, but it's hard to decipher the voice. So again, I would say then we should go to people who really care about us, to a mentor. And, one of the great Jewish teachings is Aseh lecha rav, that you should make for yourself a teacher, make for yourself a mentor, because sometimes you can't hear in yourself what others hear in you, or you can't see in yourself what others see in you. So sometimes we need help, right? Or in the words of Joel Cocker, a little help from my friends. We need we need a little help from our friends or from our mentors. But certainly we have to do everything in our power to allow this voice within to lead us. I'll share with you just another quick anecdote, but I heard this from a great man, a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Dr. Tzvi Hirsch Weinrab, who also has a doctorate in psychology. And I asked him whether this story was true, and he said, yes. In fact, not only is this story true, it's the best piece of advice I've ever received. And this is a story. He says that in the 70s, when he was just starting off as a rabbi and as a doctor of psychology, he had many self-doubts and questions. And he decided to call one of the great rabbis of Jewish history, I would say, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson of blessed memory, who lived then in New York, and asked him all of these questions. So he called him, the secretary picked up, the secretary of this great rabbi, of Rabbi Schneerson, and he didn't want to exactly reveal who he was. So he said to the secretary, here's a Jew from Maryland who would like to speak to the great rabbi about questions on self-doubts, etc. The secretary says, you know what, the rabbi is here in the room. Let me ask him if he can speak with you. So the secretary turns to Rabbi Schneerson. He says, there's a Jew from Maryland. I don't know what his name is, but he has many self-doubts and he wants to speak with you. The great rabbi, Rabbi Schneerson, turns to the secretary and says, if this Jew is from Maryland, then he should go to Rabbi Dr. Tzvi Hirsch Weinrab, which was him, the guy calling. So the secretary tells this to Rabbi Weinrab, Rabbi is stunned, and he says, whoa, it is me. That's who's calling. I am Rabbi Dr. Tzvi Hirsch Weinrab. The secretary himself is shocked, and he goes back to Rabbi Schneerson. He says, Rabbi Schneerson, it is Rabbi Weinrab on the phone. And Rabbi Schneerson tells the secretary, then tell Rabbi Weinrab that from time to time, it's good to speak to yourself. And he said, again, this was the best piece of advice he's ever received. But I think that this is one way we can discover the voice within. Sometimes we live in a world that is so boisterous, and we have to stop everything and start speaking to ourselves, to our deeper self, to that infinite potential, to that which we truly are, not to that which we have, that which we are. And then we'll discover that really we are called upon to be great people doing great things.
Always, I believe that to be true, and to ask for the guidance, ask for the help.
Right.
We must remember to ask. And, they say that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And so when we ask, a teacher appears. And I'm so deeply grateful that you have appeared in my life as one of my great teachers, and now this great teacher to all of our listeners and viewers today. With all my love, thank you, Rabbi.
Of course, with all my love, thank you so much, Vered. It was such a pleasure. And God bless you for all the holy work you do. Really, thank you.
And Rabbi, if people want to learn more about you, more about the congregation, where can they do that?
So they can go to my personal website, rabbiallouche.org, RABBIALLOUCHE.org, or they can go to our congregation's website also. It's cbtaz.org. Thank you.
Thank you once again, Rabbi, and Shabbat Shalom. All the best to you and your family.
Thank you, and to you too. All the very best. Thank you.